I forgot my ball. How ironic. What I was going to say, just as we're thinking of first priorities when it comes to the church, when it comes to childhood, one of the first priorities, I lost my screen. Okay. Well, I'll go with it. One of the first priorities as a kid was to have a good ball. Anybody relate with that? When you're a kid, if you have a ball, you're going to have a good time, right? Yeah, I played kickball all the time. I don't know if people still play kickball to this day, but that was the thing when I was a third grader. All the kids in the apartment complex I lived in, we all gathered outside, played kickball in the most dangerous areas because we were about to hit cars, windows, whatever. But, it was fun. I played soccer all the time, everywhere. We played wall ball, which, there's other names for that game, but if you know, you know. Anyways, I played all sorts of games with the ball. If you had a ball, again, you had a good time. But when the game was done, when you heard the infamous phrase, "I'm taking my ball and I'm going home," the game is done. You either have to reinvent the game or you're going home too. Usually somebody didn't have another ball with them, but, they can go home for any number of reasons. It could be something like, dinner time. It could be time to go to bed. It could be, they're upset with something. It could be any number of reasons. They could have gotten hurt. But again, when the game was done, when the person took their ball and went home, again, game was done. Things haven't really changed much, though, from childhood games to what we do today. We have all sorts of different jobs. We have all sorts of different roles in life. You may be sons and daughters. You may be friends and rivals. You may be in dating relationships or marriages. You may be a parent, a student in elementary, middle, high, or college ages. In all of these different phases, you have different roles that you play. And this is not an all-encompassing list by any means. You have different things that you do in life that make you specifically you. You have different hobbies that you have different dreams that you have different projects that you're doing, and in each of those, they become a big part of your life. Now, your jobs, on the other hand, are a huge portion of your life. On average, if you work an 8-hour day, 40 hours a week, you are spending, on the low end, 1/3 of your life working. That's on the low end. You're closer to probably half of your life working. All of this consumes a large portion of your time. And it's kind of like a ball. You carry all sorts of stuff with you. All sorts of stuff that comprises your life. And you have the decision with what you are holding to decide, is it just a ball? Is it just a job? Is it just a role? Or is it something more? What I want to argue is it's something like a calling. If you have called yourself a follower of Christ, your job, your roles in your life shift from just being jobs to a calling. John Stott writes this idea of what a calling is, if we're to give a definition to what calling is. The expenditure of energy, manual, mental, or both, in service of others, which brings fulfillment to the worker and benefit to the community and glory to God. And it sounds really big, but when we think about our jobs particularly, when you think about the things that you do, you have to decide first, is your job just a job? Are you just a mom? Are you just a dad? Are you just a friend? Are you just a family member? Are you just a student? Is your role that you are playing just blank? Or is it something more than just that? In all that you do, when you think about your idea of a job or your idea of a role or your idea of a calling, in all that you do, are you more affected by the decisions of your heart or the following of Jesus? And I'll tell you right now, the decisions of your heart come easy. And I don't blame you, because that is the way that is natural. And we're going to see with David, even with all of the equipment, with all of the training, with all of the practice, with all of the witnesses of God, he still dropped the ball. We're going to be holding this ball and dropping it a lot today. Bear with me. Lastly, do you see that your following of Jesus means that it involves your whole life, including your job and any of the roles that you have? Now, I'm not asking you to answer these questions right now. These are the things that I want you to consider as we travel through this text. And we're in the middle of a series called King of My Heart. And there are all sorts of different things that vie for first place in your heart. And if it is not Jesus Christ, if God is not the king of your heart, anything and everything will take its place quickly. And it will not be enough. It will not last, because when that thing fails, you have to find something new to replace it. Even if it is yourself. You're trying to reinvent a way to continue moving forward. As we sung in our last song, God has never failed, and he never will fail. So the sermon title today is Callings Are Signal Fire. In times of darkness, in times of challenge, you're always looking for some way to continue going, some direction to go, and like a signal fire, God's promises stand to guide us and lead us in the callings that he gives us. So as we look at 1 Samuel 27, the big idea is if we follow God, he guides us in our callings and through all our challenges. And where David has come up to this point, David, who was a young boy, well before, he's probably, I would guess, maybe 30, 40 at this point. Probably getting closer to 40, because that's when he started his reign as king. He's been anointed to be the next king of Israel from the previous king who has gone his own way, done his own thing, and is engaging in all kinds of wrong stuff. He's anointed as king, but remains a shepherd, and then is called to battle. Fights a giant, goes out, fights many wars and many battles, wins. He is favored by the people. People sing his praises. They say, David has slain his 10,000s and Saul his thousands. And Saul grows jealous and treats David like an enemy, even though David is his greatest supporter. David grows afraid. The giant didn't scare him. The enemy nations did not scare him, but the king of Israel scared him. And he ran. He left his comfort. He left his wife. He left his best friend. He left his family, and he ran. And he ran for years and years and years, probably close to 10 or 15 years of running, and it turned into this deadly game of hide and seek, where Saul constantly sought to kill him. He did not know if the people around him in different towns were friend or foe, if they would betray him or support him. He was in constant fear. So David's hanging on to this promise from God. He has this special anointing. He has this special understanding of how God moves in a very unique way in David's life. He's hanging on to all these promises. He has seen how God is moving in him, but still, verse 1, David kept thinking to himself, or the Hebrew says, he said in his own heart, someday Saul is going to get me. The best thing I can do is escape to the Philistines. Then Saul will stop hunting me in Israelite territory, and I will finally be safe. So David doesn't just drop the ball. He says, I'm done. I keeps falling, man. I'm done. I'm leaving. I'm going away. I don't want Saul to even come close to finding me. I'm not just leaving. I'm not just hiding in my own country anymore. I'm leaving completely. It's like going from the United States all the way down to South America. I'm gone. I don't want anybody to even remember me, because I am done with this deadly game of hide and seek. But what's curious about this, and what's curious about this entire chapter, is that God is not mentioned once. David's heart posture is mentioned multiple times, and how he affects the people around him is mentioned multiple times. What's said in Proverbs 4:23 about the idea of following your heart is this: above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Sounds like good advice first, right? What comes from your heart, what, be it good or bad, could affect people in great ways, could affect you in great ways. But the addendum comes from Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? So even though you have this wealth of knowledge coming from your heart in the direction that you think is right to go, your instincts of what you think is right, you have a problem with your own heart. Thaddeus Williams, in his book, to Don't Follow Your Heart, talks against the mantra that comes from Steve Jobs and many other celebrity figures who say there is no reason to not follow your heart. His argument is this: your hearts are too dull. Sounds offensive at first. Your hearts may be genuinely interesting. You may have great intentions and great dreams and great motivations, but the thing is, when the standard stops at yourself, it's easy to become claustrophobic. When something goes wrong and life squeezes in and problems grow, the smallness of your own heart makes things grow more and more dull. But the infiniteness of God's heart allows us to see an even bigger picture outside of ourselves. Our hearts are too dithering in the sense that it goes any which way that you want. And nothing ever really stays the same. Great philosophers in the past have said that you never step in the same part of a river twice. It's always moving. Likewise, our emotional standards cannot be the basis, as we are constantly changing. God remains trustworthy and as solid as a stone. Where we are constantly changing and constantly moving and different standards arise, God's standard remains the same, perfect and true, constantly. Our hearts are too divided. C.S. Lewis writes, telling us to obey instinct is like telling us to obey people. People say different things, so do instincts. Each instinct, if you listen to it, will claim to be gratified at the expense of all the rest. It's kind of like if you think in your workplace. You're getting along with somebody. Do you think that standard applies to everybody else in the office or wherever you work? Very quickly, no. I remember working at Dollar Tree for 6-7 years. I worked as a manager, and I could not treat all people the same. Even if I got along with the same person, if I treated one person different than the other, people notice. If I treat people all the same, people notice. And they take radical offense if you do not treat them uniquely in the way that they need to be treated. Same thing with customers. I always hear the phrase, the customer is always right. I don't know if that's true, but the thing is, if you're not engaging with people in very unique ways, you'll see very quickly that things become problematic very quickly. The same thing happens in our own hearts. Our hearts, as divided as they are, it is very hard to get one particular standard. Our hearts are too depraved, as Thaddeus Williams will say. There's a handful of scriptures, as we saw in Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is deceitful above all things, desperately sick. Who can understand it? In Ecclesiastes 9:3, the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in the hearts while they live. In Matthew 15:19 through 20, Jesus says, out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, and slander. Proverbs 28:26 sums everything up, saying that he who trusts in his own heart is a fool. Thaddeus Williams will also go on one more time to say that the heart is delusional. One of the best documented findings in social science is a phenomena called self-serving bias. David Myers documents this idea as he surveys most Americans, saying that they view themselves as more intelligent, more ethical, and less prejudiced than their neighbors and peers. A whopping 94% of college professors believe themselves to be superior to their average colleagues, and one College Board surveys about 829,000 high school seniors to rate their ability to get along with others. Sure enough, 100% ranked themselves above average. It's the science catching up with the scriptures and saying every way of a man is right in his own eyes. The standards of our own heart are mixed and mired. So when David speaks in his own heart, I need to go my own way. I need to do my own thing. I need to figure out how to get away from this mess that Saul has put me in. He follows his own direction. Again, he drops the ball. This is the price to pay when you follow your heart. 1 Samuel 27, 2-4. So David took his 600 men and went over and joined Achish, son of Maoch, the king of Gath. David and his men and their family settled there with Achish at Gath. David brought his 2 wives along with him, Ahinoam from Jezreel and Abigail, Nabal's widow from Carmel. Word soon reached Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he stopped hunting for him. Now this is interesting. Again, you don't see any mention of God. You see him going his own way. You see him doing his own thing. And how does this relate in our own life? I think what's interesting is there are times that we want comfort and security and rest far more than being in the areas that we're supposed to be. If we're to define a calling in a place where we are most gratified, where we bring the most life to other people, and where we glorify God the most, there are many times where it's easy to reject that calling because it gets hard. I tell you, when you are in a calling, you will never be more attacked than you are when you're going your own way. You will never have the most threat coming to you than when you are following that calling. It is a very unique experience. David, when he was in his calling, when he was the incumbent king, he was constantly being attacked. His life was constantly threatened. And that doesn't sound like the prized way to win, to live. But the thing is, it's the most gratifying place. We may not be in places where our lives are threatened, but we may be in a place where our lives are challenged. Think about your own life. In your job, are you where you are supposed to be? And only you really know that. And if you don't, the best place to start is in prayer, asking God, where are you calling me to go? What are you calling me to do with the talents and the treasures that you have given me? With the time that you have given me? It's a very difficult place to be there first. But then you may be also asking the question, just knowing more about God, just trusting God more, just reading my Bible more, just praying more, is that really the only answer to figuring out this next phase of life? Like, how could you answer the question, how are you supposed to work in the office? How do I get along with the people there? How do I get along with people in the factory? How do I get along with people that I work with in retail? How do I get along with my family who is at odds with me? How do I get along with my mom and dad? How would I get through all of my schooling? Where does the Bible specifically talk about all these things? What's really interesting is we have to start with a particular standard before we get anywhere else. Alistair Begg states, the reality is that you must know truth about God first. Then, and only then, what you know about God will empower you to press on, no matter the circumstances. It is truth that transforms us. The standard of understanding what you're doing matters first. I remember I worked in Lowe's for about 2 years. I was a middle manager for a time, and I really, really, really wanted to be head of the department. I had all the equipment, I had a lot of training and management, and I got pretty far in the interview process. And then my manager over me sat me down, and he said one thing I won't forget to this day. I'm not mad at him, but this transformed my thinking. He sat me down and he said, "You are not Lowe's cultured enough." And I hated that. It's like, what does that even mean? My life is not Lowe's, but here's the thing. He wanted me to fully understand what it meant to be on mission there, to be part of the team there in a very unique way. And I could have continued going that way, but it was so frustrating at that time, I gave up pursuit in that direction. But it has transformed my thinking to understand, am I Christ-cultured enough? And how am I going to be continually Christ-cultured as I serve as a Christian and live out my calling? For David, going his own way, dropping the ball, he gave that up for a time. And he went his own way into enemy territory. He led 600 people and their own families with him. Your influence and your actions matter, friends. And David, while he's on mission throughout the rest of the chapter of 1 Samuel 27, 3 through 12, I know it says 2 through 4, it is kind of like a dead end. One day, in verse 5, David says to Achish, the king of Gath. Mind you, this land was the land where David conquers the champion of Gath. He defeats the people of the land, and David goes to Gath originally to escape from Saul. He feigns madness, and then he escapes from this place again. These people know him. They sing the songs about David, him slaying his 10,000s and Saul his thousands. They know all about David. But David's identity shifts from just being the hero of Israel now to the outlaw of Israel. They are thinking they have some level of leverage over David to be able to use him in his influence. So David says to Achish, if it's all right with you, we would rather live in the country towns instead of here in the royal city. And it might sound like a decent bargain because, you have 600 men plus their families and all of the livestock moving from the capital to another land to cultivate that area and to continue to spread influence. This town, Achish gives the town of Ziklag to David and his men, which still belongs to the king of Judah to this day. And they lived there among the Philistines for a year and 4 months. David and his men spent their time raiding. David goes from the incumbent king to a raider. It's as if he's picking up another role, another task. He's picked up something he doesn't need to be holding, but still holds it anyway. And he trains the people around him to hang on to this. But he raids the Geshurites, the Girzites, the Amalekites, the people who lived near Shur, towards the land of Egypt since ancient times. David did not leave one person alive in the villages he attacked. He took the sheep, the goats, the cattle, the donkey, the camels, and clothing before returning home to see King Achish. King Achish would ask, where did you make your raid today? And David, through a very manipulative and cunning fashion, chose isolated areas where people lived in tents. He attacked nomad people. He said he was attacking nomad people from the land of Israel. He said that he attacked the south of Judah, the Jerahmeelites, and the Kenites. He was saying that he was attacking his own people, the Israelites. But in reality, he was attacking the allies of the Philistines. Verse 11, no one was left alive to come to Gath and tell where he had really been. This happened again and again while he was living among the Philistines. Achish believed David and thought to himself, by now the people of Israel must hate him bitterly. Now he will have to stay here and serve me forever. It's a very unique situation David's in. David, in enemy territory, he is in defiance of his calling. He's left the stuff that he has been holding before. He may still remember it. He may still have that, something like a signal fire in the distance, but he's gone his own way, thinking that he is safe here. He may be doing good things for the nation of Israel, still attacking the enemies of Israel, but he's doing it through deceptive practices. And in that process, his influence is reaching to enemy people saying, I'm on your side. I belong to you, is the perception that is being built. David may not be where he is supposed to be, nor is he shown that he is actively trusting God in this text. Instead, we get an account from Achish that David appears to be hated by the Israelites, and Achish wants to make David his servant. David is becoming more proficient in his enemy eyes. And the thing is, when we are not living in our own calling, And when we are not living where we are supposed to take responsibility in our lives, whether you're a mom or a dad, whether you're a child or in the process of growing and listening to your parents, in learning to live the right way, or if you're a student as you're learning to do the right thing in order to get to the right next step in your life. If you are not taking responsibility where you are in your function in your job, whether you're supposed to be in that job long term or if the job is different in the future, wherever you are in that moment in your life, in this moment, if you're not recognizing it as a calling but trying to follow your own heart and do your own thing, what we end up doing is we start shaving off truth, trying to make it as palatable, as comfortable as possible. We manipulate the situation just enough so that we can coast through our life. This is why I hate the phrase, "it is what it is." This is why I hate the phrase, "just living the dream." This is why I hate the phrase, "it's just another day in paradise." Because what does that mean? It means you're just coasting. You're not living. You're not acknowledging the opportunities that you're holding. Instead, you might acknowledge what you have, but you kind of place it down. And you just wait. Or you chase something completely different that you're not supposed to be. It turns into a dead end. This is where David is. God eventually intercedes for David, but David, what I want you to see from Psalm 3 is intriguing. Again, this comes from a place of maturity. What we saw earlier from this text is David had to learn the hard way first in order for him to be able to even say these words. David with all of his enemies. David with understanding that God is his shield all around him. David understanding that God is his glory, the one who holds his head high. And even when there are 1,000, 10,000 enemies who surround him, him not fearing comes from a place of maturity and understanding that it took a lot of uphill battles to reach that point. A lot of mistakes, a lot of sin, and a lot of growth. So to say these last couple verses, "Arise, O Lord, rescue me, my God. Slap all the enemies in the face, shatter the teeth of the wicked. Victory comes from you, O Lord. May you bless your people." This comes from a place of humility and understanding that David couldn't do it by himself. This is the lesson to us today. We can't do life by ourselves. Our hearts deceive us and lead us to places of destruction. God leads us to a place of maturity, even if we go completely in the wrong direction, if we chase the wrong signal fire, if we drop the ball and chase something completely different. If we're trusting in God, even before all of that, if we have turned to God, God will still work in those moments. God still worked in the life of David in those moments when he went his own way. And when David eventually turned back to God, but there was growth in that process. There was hardship in that process. There was trying in that process. And there was a challenge to mature. And maturing hurts because you have to let go of the things that you think you control. I've always found this picture really funny. Little character from The Simpsons, and Bus is going crazy, and he chuckles to himself just saying, "I'm in danger." I think this is where David is. Because at the beginning of 1 Samuel 28, 1 through 2, it says, "About that time the Philistines mustered their armies for another war with Israel. King Achish told David, 'You and your men will be expected to join me in battle.' David says, 'Very well. Now you will see for yourself what we can do.' Then Achish told David, 'I will make you my personal bodyguard for life.'" So David's been lying this whole time. He's not been attacking Israel. But now he has to. Because now he's between a rock and a hard place. His lies and his manipulation has caught up with him. And the thing is, if you're living a lie, if you are living a manipulative life, if you are lying to yourself or lying to others, I will tell you, it will catch up to you. You will have to face a time of reckoning. I'm not just talking about at the end of life. Things catch up to you where you will realize, I have to make another decision. Do I evolve the lie? Or do I acknowledge that something has to change? For David at first, he continued the lie. Fast forwarding to 1 Samuel 29, the Philistine army eventually says, you're not going to go with us. You're going to betray us eventually. And you need to completely leave. Even if you're an ally right now, your allegiance may change. God interceded in a very unique way, still through David's enemy, to put David back on track. Just to give you a bit of a jump ahead. But here, when we're trusting in God, when our life is challenged, when we've gone our own way and done our own thing, you will be challenged to decide which way you're going to go. Do I follow my heart, or do I follow the path that God has called me to? I've been reading a biography and several books by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He's a German theologian. He lived during the First World War, and he died towards the end of the Second World War. He was prolific during the time where Hitler was in power. And he saw a lot of his family and a lot of his friends dying. And through his particular theology and through his particular way of living, he would have been next, sentenced to a concentration camp for what he believed. So he found an elaborate way to escape to America, and he stayed there for all of 26 days, serving as a teacher of theology in a prestigious school, but felt a strong calling to return to Germany, where he knew he would die one day. And that calling is never easy. When you know that where you're going to go is going to be tough. But the calling became so overwhelming, he knew he had to return, and so he did. And he became one of 7,000 people who were captured. 5,000 of those 7,000 were murdered by Hitler himself and his officers. And he was killed, he was hung during that time. But still, he lived this mantra out. When Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. And that sounds extreme, but the thing is, you're dying to yourself. You're dying to the old way that you were living. Jesus says, you take up your cross and you follow me. When you are following Christ, you are abandoning the things that are comfortable and secure in this world for something that is of eternal and lasting value, that is of perfect value. Romans 12, 1-2 says this, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in the view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. What does that mean? That means even though you may not understand what's going to happen next, even though you may go into a place that is extremely challenging, even though the calling that you may have in your life may seem wild and ludicrous. For me, becoming a pastor was wild and ludicrous. I looked at my life like 15, 20 years ago. I wouldn't picture myself here. I'm still afraid standing on this stage because I understand the value of what I'm doing. What you are doing in your particular callings, wherever you are in your life, when you understand the value of what you're doing, the impact of what you're doing in your particular jobs, in your particular roles, they matter immensely. To God and to the people around you, when you are living out the great commandment to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. When you're living that out, you see the value of everything you are doing in your life. Your whole life becomes ministry. The questions that we have to ask about our calling is this. When we're living out the great commandment to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself, you may ask a lot of questions that determine how do you actually live out a calling. Dan Ryland posted this in a recent blog. What it means to follow your calling is you need to answer these questions. About clarity first, what is God saying to you? Second, commitment. Are you prepared to pay the price? When you're committed to something, you have to be all in. If you're half in, you're not really doing anything. Competence. What is your gifting and passion? What is most gratifying to you that is a blessing to others and glorifies God? Correction. Are you willing to follow first, make mistakes, learn and grow? David made all kinds of mistakes. He was told he was going to be king. He probably waited 20, 25 years before he actually became king. In that process of king making, he learned what it meant to trust God first. His standard of being a man after God's own heart took time and molding. Consistency. Do you have the resilience to play the long game? Are you going to stay true to the course that you're on? Character. What keeps you connected to the values and convictions that you have in a changed life? Is your vision aligned with heaven? This is what a calling looks like. And again, we face all kinds of troubles. We were talking about James yesterday at the men's breakfast, and I thought this was very important just to consider. When life comes, and the key word is when. When life's challenges come. When troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow, so let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Afterward, they will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. And remember, when you are being tempted, do not say, God is tempting me. God is never tempted to do wrong, and he never tempts anyone. Temptation comes from our own desires or our own hearts, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to sinful actions, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. This is the contrast again between your heart values and following God. So the big idea is this. If we follow God, he guides us in our callings and through our challenges. The bottom line that I want you to understand in everything that we've talked about today is when we communicate our plans in our own heads and hearts, we often finalize things that need something greater than ourselves. The further we derail, coast, and dismiss our callings, the more proficient in sin we get. And if you don't follow God, or if you are not paying attention to what you are following, then when the day comes that things get tough, you will crash. It will affect you and everyone around you. The best practice is to recognize who you're following and what your callings are now. And friends, everything starts with humility before the Lord, knowing that you can't do it, but God can, and he will. So my challenge to you, I ask you to be a kid. Come as a kid before the Lord, find a ball, any ball that you have at home. And I want you to pray the ball prayer. To believe that God is a particular vision and plan for you. To ask God to determine what your callings are, where he is leading you. To let go that will be able to bless many people around you, gratify you in an immensely deep way, and give him the most